All right, so you guys wanted to know more about the Paris Commune, huh? Well, buckle up, because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
It really is one of those historical moments that just captures the imagination, doesn't it? I mean, you've got this incredible mix of social upheaval, revolutionary fervor, and, bold experiments and self-governance all crammed into 2 months?
Yeah, and it's 1871. France is, still kind of reeling from the Franco-Prussian War.
A defeated nation, a capital city under siege, and you've got this powder keg of social tensions just waiting to explode.
Exactly. And out of all this chaos, this radical socialist government just seizes control of Paris. And it's not just some flash in the pan either. The Paris Commune has had a huge ripple effect on global political thought. Pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so fascinating to study. It's this short-lived experiment, but it throws up all these huge questions about power, about social justice, about the very nature of revolution.
So I guess, like any good deep dive, we need to start at the beginning, right? Paris, 1871. Paint us a picture. What's the situation on the ground?
Well, you've got a city that's basically been through the ringers. I mean, imagine the hardships.
Yeah, people are struggling just to survive.
Exactly. Food shortages, economic instability, this constant threat of bombardment from the Prussians. It's a recipe for unrest,
And it's the working class that's bearing the brunt of all this.
Right? Oh, absolutely. They're the ones who are suffering the most, and they're the ones who are starting to get really fed up with the status quo.
So how do we go from this, simmering discontent to full-blown revolution? Where's the spark, that pivotal moment?
It's actually something that at first glance seems pretty insignificant. It all comes down to some cannons. Seriously.
With cannons.
Cannons. In March of 1871, the government tries to seize these cannons from Montmartre, which was this working class neighborhood.
Why? What's so special about these cannons?
Well, they were paid for by the people of Paris, right? So they were seen as a symbol of the people's power. And the government, the newly elected government under Adolphe Thiers, they see these cannons as a threat. They're worried about an uprising.
So they try to disarm their own citizens? Doesn't seem like the smartest move.
It was a colossal miscalculation. The people aren't having it. They see it as a direct attack on their rights, their ability to defend themselves.
Yeah, I'm guessing the National Guard is involved here, right? They're not just going to stand by and watch this happen.
The National Guard is absolutely key here. And remember, it's not just a regular army. It's more like this network of armed groups, some more radical than others.
Right. So it's not just about the cannons themselves. It's about what they represent, this defiance of authority. So what happens? Give us the blow-by-blow.
Okay, so you've got these government troops going up to Montmartre to seize the cannons, but the people, they're not backing down. There are crowds in the street shouting, protesting. The National Guard is standing their ground. It's tense, it's chaotic. And then the government troops, they hesitate. They get cold feet.
Seriously, they back down.
They do. Many of the soldiers, they sympathize with the Parisians. They don't want to fire on their own people. And the crowd, they see this hesitation, and it emboldens them even more.
Wow. So what does the government do?
Well, they're humiliated, right? They've been shown to be weak, ineffective, so they do the only thing they can think of. They flee Paris, they head to Versailles.
They abandon the city. Just like that.
Yeah, pretty much. It creates this power vacuum, and in steps the National Guard, who at this point are feeling pretty darn confident.
So this is it, huh? The stage is set for the Commune.
This is the turning point. March 18th, 1871, the Paris Commune is born.
And to think, it all started with some cannons.
It really shows you how these seemingly small events can become catalysts for massive social and political change. I mean, the cannons were just the spark, right? The real fuel was years of simmering resentment, inequality, and this desire for a different kind of society.
A society that the people of Paris were now ready to create for themselves?
Precisely. So the Commune, they weren't messing around, you know. They had a vision. They wanted to build a new kind of society, one based on socialist ideals.
Right. So it wasn't just about taking power. It was about using that power to create something different.
Exactly. They were like, okay, the old system's broken. Let's try something new.
So how did they go about doing that? I mean, where do you even start when you're trying to rebuild a society from the ground up?
Well, they started by forming a council, kind of like a city council, with elected representatives from all across Paris.
Okay, so a more democratic system.
Definitely. And they set up all these committees to oversee different aspects of life in the city. Food supplies, public works, education, you name it.
Sounds ambitious. So let's get into some specifics. What kind of policies did they actually implement?
Well, one of the big ones was rent control. They knew that high rents were crushing the working class, so they froze rents at pre-war levels.
That's interesting because even today, affordable housing is a huge issue in so many cities.
It's a problem that's been around for a long time, and the commune was trying to address it head on.
Makes sense. What else? What other kind of radical ideas were they putting into practice?
They were really into this idea of workplace democracy.
Workplace democracy.
Yeah, so basically they decreed that workers could take over and run businesses that had been abandoned by their owners during the siege.
Wow. So they're literally putting the means of production in the hands of the workers.
Pretty much. It was a radical experiment, and it didn't last long, but it gave a glimpse of what a worker-controlled economy could look like.
I bet that was pretty controversial at the time.
Oh, you can bet it was. But the commune, they weren't afraid to shake things up.
So, rent control, workplace democracy, any other big reforms we should know about?
Education was a major focus for them. They believed in free secular education for everyone.
So they're taking on the Catholic Church, which at that time had a lot of control over education.
Exactly. They wanted to create a system that was accessible to all, regardless of background or religious beliefs.
It sounds like they were really trying to level the playing field, create a more equal society.
That was the goal. They were driven by this idea that everyone deserves a fair shot.
All this sounds incredibly progressive, especially for the 1870s. But let's not forget, they're also fighting a war at the same time.
Right. They're trying to build this new society while simultaneously defending Paris from the Versailles government, who were not exactly thrilled about this whole commune thing.
So talk about a high-pressure situation.
It was intense. And this constant pressure, this need to fight on two fronts, it definitely took a toll on the commune.
It must have been incredibly difficult to manage. Okay, so we've talked about the commune's vision, their policies. Now let's talk about the people who made it all happen. Specifically, the women.
The women of the commune, they were amazing.
Yeah, I've heard they played a really active role.
Oh, they were essential. I mean, they were out there building barricades, tending to the wounded, running canteens, even fighting on the front lines.
Wow, they were really in the thick of it.
They were absolutely fearless and dedicated to the cause, but even in this radical experiment, they were still fighting for basic rights.
Like what?
Like the right to vote, for starters. They weren't allowed to vote in the commune's election.
That's so ironic. They're risking their lives for this revolution, but they don't even have a say in how it's run.
It highlights the limitations of the commune's vision, you know. Even in this supposed utopia, there were still inequalities that needed to be addressed.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear, even in a revolution. Were there any particular women who stand out, who really made their mark during this time?
Oh yeah, there were some incredible figures. Louise Michel, for example, she was known as the Red Virgin of Montmartre.
The Red Virgin of Montmartre. Yeah, that's a pretty badass nickname.
She was a total badass, a teacher, a writer, a revolutionary firebrand. She was right there on the barricades, giving speeches, rallying the troops. She became a symbol of the commune's fighting spirit.
Sounds like a woman you wouldn't want to mess with.
Definitely not. And then there's this whole thing about the Pétroluses, the female arsonists.
Oh yeah, the women who supposedly burned down Paris.
That's the story that the Versailles government pushed, but the historical evidence is pretty shaky. It seems like it was mostly propaganda, a way to demonize the communards.
So they were using these rumors to justify their crackdown on the commune.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic. Paint your enemy as monstrous, as a threat to society, and then you can justify any level of violence against them.
So the Pétroluses, they were more myth than reality.
It seems that way. While there were definitely cases of arson during the commune's final days, the idea of these organized bands of women running around setting fire to everything, that's likely an exaggeration.
It's a reminder that we always have to be careful about the stories we're told, especially when it comes to history.
Right, we have to dig deeper, look at the evidence, and not just accept the dominant narrative at face value.
Especially when that narrative is coming from the victors, the ones who write the history books.
Exactly. And speaking of the victors, that brings us to the tragic end of the commune. The Bloody Week.
A week of intense street fighting, brutal repression, and thousands of Parisians killed.
It was a horrific end to a bold experiment. But the commune's legacy, it lived on. It became this symbol of resistance, of hope, of the struggle for a more just and equitable world.
And it inspired revolutionaries and thinkers for generations to come, right?
Absolutely. Karl Marx, for example, he saw the commune as this glimpse into the future, a preview of the dictatorship of the proletariat in action. And it wasn't just Marx, you know. the Commune, it had this ripple effect. It inspired all these other revolutionary movements down the line.
So we're talking about like long-term impact, not just in France.
Oh, yeah, it went global.
Yeah.
Think about the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all these movements, they drew inspiration from the Paris Commune, from its ideals.
So those ideas that were born in the streets of Paris, they kind of like transcended borders.
They did. And it wasn't just about like specific policies or tactics. It was more about this underlying spirit, this belief that a more just and equitable world was possible.
And that ordinary people had the power to make it happen.
Exactly. It was about challenging the status quo, taking risks, daring to imagine a different kind of future. That's what resonated with people all over the world.
But the Commune also sparked a lot of debate, right? Especially among revolutionaries themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Marx, he was all about the Commune, but he also critiqued it. He said they weren't ruthless enough, that they should have been more decisive in consolidating power.
So it's like they were too idealistic, not willing to do what it takes to win.
Maybe. It's a tough question, right? How far do you go? What are you willing to sacrifice in the name of revolution?
Yeah, I mean, the Commune, they were ultimately crushed. Thousands of people were killed. So it's hard not to ask, like, was it worth it?
It's a question that every revolutionary movement has to grapple with. There's always a cost, a price to pay for progress, and it's never easy.
It's like this moral dilemma that's woven into the fabric of revolution itself.
And I think that's what makes the Paris Commune so fascinating, even all these years later. It forces us to confront these really tough questions. It's a story of idealism, of courage, of sacrifice, but also of tragedy.
And it's a story that still resonates today. I mean, we're still talking about these same issues: social justice, inequality, the role of government, the power of the people.
Exactly. Those themes, they're timeless. They speak to the human condition, to our never-ending quest for a better world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Paris Commune, what are the big takeaways? What should people remember about this brief but incredibly impactful moment in history?
Well, I think first and foremost, we should remember that it was a real experiment.
Yeah.
It was an attempt, however flawed, to create a more just and equitable society.
And it was driven by ordinary people.
Absolutely. These weren't like career politicians or elites. These were workers, artists, activists, everyday people who dared to imagine something different.
And they were willing to fight for it, to put their lives on the line for their beliefs.
And in doing so, they left behind this incredible legacy. They showed us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible.
That even if you fail, you can still inspire others to keep fighting.
Exactly. The Paris Commune, it may have been crushed, but its ideas, its spirit, it lives on. It's a reminder that the struggle for a better world is never truly over.
And that we all have a role to play in that struggle. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for what you believe in. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the Paris Commune. Thanks for joining us.